I mean, I feel like I'm experiencing other places in the universe. I've met dozens of beings. I've been to at least 2 or 3 planets. A lot of the time I'm just in space. We all come to yoga for different reasons, usually based around our physicality in some way. We want to move better. Maybe even sometimes you're there for the breath work, but most people are there for the physical body aspects of the practice.
You know, when I asked my teacher about this, and he said, but there was value in it coming in the way that it did to the West because it opened up possibilities so that people could start with the physicality and then start to realize the spirituality.
At some point, you stop identifying with the mind and the body and you drop into the spirit and the consciousness. And I think that's the shift that you're describing. The Sanskrit terms are Purusha and Prakriti. Purusha being the soul and Prakriti being the material world. The soul, Purusha, is defined as the unchanging, and everything else, and that's been very easy for me once that really landed in my being, to be able to separate into my seer, because anything that changes is not that eternal nature. It's not consciousness.
Welcome to SoulPod, where science meets mysticism and your inner wisdom leads the way. Welcome back, light beings, to another episode of Soul Podcast. I am really excited to dive into a conversation today. And I'm joined by Kaitlyn, who's a yoga teacher, Reiki practitioner, and someone who's walked a very real awakening process from anxiety and destabilization into grounded, applied stillness, now guiding others through those same teachings. Welcome, Kaitlyn. Excited to have you today.
Thank you, Crystal. I'm so happy to be here. It's an honor, and I just feel very aligned with your message and your spirit. It's great to be here.
Yeah, likewise. So I wanted to start us off, especially for people who may not know what the Yoga Sutras are. What are they, and how have they impacted your life, Kaitlyn?
Yeah. So yoga is an ancient practice. It's practiced for thousands and thousands of years, and probably at least 500 or so before the sutras were put together. And they were synthesized by a wise sage named Patanjali. And essentially, it is a compilation of what yoga is, how we practice it, and what it can unlock within each of us.
Yes, excited for this. And for those of you who have studied yoga, or you may have heard Patanjali before, Kaitlyn's has a really beautiful understanding of them. And I think the sutras, at least in my experience, also seem to reveal themselves to you over time. And you can go back to them and you get something else new out of them. They truly are timeless in that way. And I wanted to talk to you about yoga and really any spiritual practice being this journey from seeking to feel better, like to have less stress, feel calmer, sleep better. We all want that. But there seems to be a moment when it changes to shifting how it is you perceive reality. Has that been your experience, and how have the sutras been a part of that?
Oh, absolutely. So I've always described my spiritual awakening as a grassroots experience. And I was very open, and that really started the whole process, was just an opening to, hey, I don't know what's real. I don't know what's true. And I want to serve what is real and true. So show me truth, like reveal yourself. And I think the reason I really resonated with yoga is a lot of the wisdom in it had already come to me in different ways. I think that's why it lands with me so well, because I had already begun to observe it as a latent spiritual truth before I really even got into the actual texts of it. And I think, to your point, that we all come to yoga for different reasons, usually based around our physicality in some way. We want to move better. Maybe even sometimes you're there for the breath work, but most people are there for the physical body aspects of the practice. But like I said, it's such a latent truth. Doing these things at some point, you stop identifying with the mind and the body and you drop into the spirit and the consciousness. And I think that's the shift that you're describing. And I think if you come to the mat with openness, it's inevitable for that shift to happen.
Totally. Yeah, that was my experience too, was connecting with yoga, flow yoga, all kinds of different kinds. And it being a very physical experience, which is beautiful. And I love that you mentioned the inevitability, because it truly is. Like, even if you're just focused on the physicality of it, at some point something opens up. And for me, I remember I was in a yoga class, and we went to the last few postures, and all of a sudden I had this like light coming into my, like with my eyes closed, into my left side, like a bright light coming in, like somebody was shining a flashlight in my eyes. And that was my first, like, ooh, something else is going on here. Like something else clicked in. There's a metaphysical component, there's a spiritual component. And I don't know how you feel about this. And I know that it can be somewhat controversial. That's okay. But the Western approach to yoga being so physically focused. But I think, when I asked my teacher about this, he's a third generation yogi, and he said, but there was value in it coming in the way that it did to the West, because it opened up possibilities so that people could start with the physicality and then start to realize the spirituality. And maybe that was one of the better ways for this to be integrated into our society. But I do think that there's a hunger, and this is what I'm so passionate about at SoulPod, for the metaphysical, for the spiritual, for it to transition from physical and intellectual into the experiential, and to really live yoga. Yoga meaning union, like bringing all parts of yourself together. So I'm curious what you think about in your practice, in your teaching with your students. Do you find that you're starting to move, or already have moved, into this more like spiritual component of it? And has Yoga Sutras been part of that?
Such a timely question for me. Just to back up for a second with something else you said, BKS and Yeagar was one of the main yogis who brought yoga over here to the West. And there were others, but most of the YTTs, or yoga teacher trainings, are based in a BKS and Yeagar lineage. Which, is very physical, teaches advanced asanas, power vinyasa, those things. And from my perspective, there was no other way for Westerners to adapt the practice except for in physicality, because that's where they were with the information, right? Like, I think we do kind of, as we grow and open to the information, we pull different things, and being able to contort your body and strengthen your body, I think, was the first thing that really what was held on to here. But it's also a shame, right? Because we see it over and over again in this emphasis on hot yoga, and even in the more spiritual practices, people who might not feel like they're getting it because you're trying to show them something different. And, I feel as a teacher, I fell backwards into a lot of things that never really resonated, because I was taught that this is how it is. This is yoga. This is how you teach yoga. For example, one prominent in my mind is when we set intentions. Most of the time, it's the first thing you do. You sit down, close your eyes. Your instructor tells you to set an intention. For me, getting into the sutras, yoga is really centered in meditation, for one, but also in this quiet, open willingness, Um, it's a quiet and a stilling of the mind so you can let the divine in. So I've shifted to setting intentions at the end of class, really cueing and guiding, welcoming my students to kind of soften themselves and then take the wisdom from your practice and set an intention for off the mat, where true yogic work is, because it's so much more than asana.
Oh, I love that. I love the idea of setting the intention when you're in that altered state of being, when you've shifted something physically, mentally, spiritually. That is the most potent time to set intention. So it makes a lot of sense. And I can understand at the beginning of class, you're kind of tapping into, okay, where am I at? Where do I want to go? And that's beautiful, but you're right. It is different. And I think that's why I personally gravitated towards Kriya Yoga, Paramahansa Yogananda's lineage, and multiple different lineages from there. But the thing I love about that practice is that it kind of leads with the spiritual aspect. And it is about asana for sure, but it's a lot about those interstitial moments, that meditation, landing you into an altered state of consciousness. And each Kriya being designed to do that, to land you somewhere new. And all practice is, but I really do love Kriya personally. But for you, we've talked about one pointed focus. I would love to hear how you think about one pointed focus and what is that doing in our system over time?
Yeah, so one pointed focus is it can be very challenging, right? It's very foreign, especially in our modern lives where we have constant stimuli, a constant scroll, an ad, a screen. Um, to hone all that in and keep your focus for 5, 10, 20 minutes on one object. Um, Gosh, I feel like sometimes I can go through my entire life in staring into an object or focusing on something before I can actually settle into it. And the idea behind it, as guided by the sutras, is that when you can soften into an object, you absorb into it. So I feel like it's almost like a practice in this oneness, to just kind of lose yourself into something else that, in theory is you already.
Yes. Yes. I love that. I'm curious. I've been thinking about this a lot. It's losing yourself in the inherent, like you're saying, the oneness, but it's almost like you're taking the analytical mind out of the equation a bit more so that you don't have these labels, this interstitial experience, and there's a purity of presence that seems to emerge. And I'm curious what your relationship is, because I've been thinking about this a lot myself, between one pointed focus and then diffuse focus and letting the focus go into unbounded awareness. Because I play with both in my practice.
Mm-hmm.
How is that? Do you play with both those kind of different sides of focus?
I think I can address this best through bringing up a very sutra focus, which is the idea of the seer and the seen. We're talking about soul and everything else. The Sanskrit terms are Purusha and Prakriti. Purusha being the soul and Prakriti being the material world, which in the yogic philosophy includes our mind, our thoughts, our emotions, everything that changes. Right. So the soul Purusha is defined as the unchanging, and everything else. And that's been very easy for me once that really landed in my being to be able to separate into my seer, because anything that changes is not that eternal nature. It's not consciousness. So, to your point, and you might have to remind me what your original question was, but in that process of one pointed focus, the material parts of you meld to the material object that you're concentrating on, right? And it allows this separation for you to drop in to that higher consciousness.
No, I think you answered that beautifully. The seer, that unchanging, the soul, the higher self, whatever you want to call it. It feels like to me when I'm playing with one pointed focus, whether that's a focus on an object, a mantra, the breath, it's bringing all of yourself into a singular focus so that you can kind of clear the debris that's in the way when you're so all over the place in our minds, which so many of us are during our days. So it's extremely helpful for the mind to train the mind. And then there's an opportunity, this unfocused expansion, that you almost like fall back into that unchanging that you're talking about. You fall back into it and you're immersed in, I like that word, the unchanging, the foundational. And it's harder to put words to that. It's harder to point to that than it is to point to the singular focus. But they're, at least in my experience, two very profound and different experiences, and they mix with each other at the same time, right? Because that can happen through the one pointed focus, where all of a sudden everything emerges, and that expansion is accessible. So it's extremely profound, and it does take training. Has that been your experience as far as what, I guess this is my question, what has been your evolution in expanding your capacity to really dive into that focus? Was it hard for you at the beginning?
Oh, absolutely. Especially with being, someone with an intense opening of third eye vision, getting into these relaxed states, my body immediately goes into astral projection. I immediately am in my astral body. So it's been a whole nother process. And sometimes I sit in meditation, I just go and I'm out in that way. And I really have to center and focus myself to still not only my mind, but then still my astral body, and keep grounded into a, core and real stillness practice. And it doesn't always happen every time, right? Like sometimes, like we were just saying, sometimes just the practice, you will get benefits of just clarity and understanding of things. But when it does happen, I mean, it's truly profound. Like you said, it's almost like this muscle memory of, expanded consciousness when you're able to do it.
Yeah, it takes practice. So you mentioned astral projection, so we have to go and talk about that some. So in your experience, what is the astral experience? What is the astral realm and astral projection?
So for me, I mean, I feel like I'm experiencing other places in the universe. I've met dozens of beings. I've been to at least 2 or 3 planets. A lot of the time, I'm just in space. But there's a photo I'll share with you. I went to Meow Wolf in Denver a few years ago. I walked into this room and just dropped to my knees in tears. But it's a beautiful showing of what it's like to enter your astral body. And then for me, it's like as soon as I enter the astral body, I see like this dome, right? So it's almost like a film. And then all of a sudden I'll be out of it with a very specific, it's always the exact same perception of Earth from outside of it, almost like I'm in orbit with the moon or something, but I always see it from the same angle. And then from there, I mean, typically my guides or other beings drop in, and then, I have experiences from there.
Ooh, so we could talk about this the whole time. Maybe we will. But I'm curious for those who might not be familiar with astral projection. Do you have a good understanding of how you access your astral body?
Yes. So this was really my first inclination into spirituality in general. I learned about astral projection when I was 13 and tried for a really long time. Basically, all of my teenage years, I was attempting to do it. Um, and then after I had this profound spiritual awakening, like I said, I'd stopped trying, I'd basically given up. And then, really opened my consciousness and then started doing it without trying, right? Like about any time I get still or try to go to sleep, it's like I just am my astral body before I get there, which makes sense because I believe anytime we're dreaming, that's the form in which we're inhabiting.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I'm curious, do you want to talk about the beings that you meet when you're in your astral experience?
So, I would say the first time I ever had a psychedelic experience, my first visual ever, we were on the beach, 4th of July, fireworks. And a green firework went off, and it was just a giant Medusa. And it didn't really mean anything to me at the time. At that point, I was just like, oh, pretty, like, whatever. And as time has come on, like I absolutely inhabit a lineage of Medusa and reptilian beings. So that was really my first experience, was a couple different forms of reptilian beings. I also have had experiences with I don't want to misspeak here, but I'm pretty sure Lemurians, right? Literal lemur beings. Um, that was actually like over a 2-week process. I had 3 or 4 trips to them, and I don't have all the answers either. Like, there's a lot of these things where I'm like, oh well, this is what I saw, but I don't necessarily have all the context for those
Oh
things, and I
yeah.
don't,
How
I don't
could
like
you,
claim to.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But with the Lemurians in particular, I had this one experience where I transmuted some sort of negative energy for them on their planet. And the first time, the first experience, I was just like in my astral form in space, and I was presented with this like black casket, like a stone black casket. I have no other words for it. And
Interesting. Okay.
the top slid off, and it was all this dark, heavy energy. And I, without even thinking, just instinctually went into this transmutation process of the energy through me, and clearing it. And then 2 or 3 days later, and I wonder if you could speak to this too, but it was a dream before I went to sleep. But that's, and it's kind of distinct from the astral, but it was like I dropped out, and it was a very clear message. I was taken back to their planet, and everything was like empty and clean. And this one lemur that had a crown on, I believe he was his leader, he told me that I was successful in that mission and cleared that energy from their place.
Very, very cool. Yeah, I mean, we're all spiritual explorers, right? And these realms aren't going to necessarily make a ton of sense to the analytical mind, but as soon as you start to enter them, all kinds of different experiences can emerge in different dimensions of experience. I'm curious. So you mentioned reptilian. Now I know when people hear the reptilian beings, a lot of times they're associated with negativity and a lower experience. Was that your feeling, or was it a different experience for you?
So I was terrified when this stuff started happening because I had all of that knowledge as well. And none of that is wrong, right? Like, I deeply believe in that idea that they serve as some sort of oppressive force on our planet, but not all of them, right? I'm keen to information from, the Sumerian tablets and some translations of those. just like everything, no total group of beings can be bad, right? I just don't believe that about any group of people or anything. Like we're all different, and this is absolutely could be a whole conversation in itself. But if you believe that Enki and Enlil were reptilians, which, I'm, like I said, privy to that and keen to that understanding of things, they were split on what to do with us as a species after we ate from the tree of knowledge and understood all these things. So I believe there's some on either side, and I believe that I've experienced and met some on both sides of that spectrum.
Interesting. Very cool. Have you received, being in the astral, this will be my last question about the astral, but being in that space, I've found that there's almost like different laws. I don't know if you'd call them laws, but the access to information is a bit different. Have you carried back anything that you've learned from the astral? Any insight or wisdom?
Oh, so I'm so glad we're talking about this, because this is really what brought me to yoga. I was very overwhelmed, and I did not feel like I had any protection or any idea of what was going on while being in that form of my being. And using the detachment and the breathing and separating from my emotions and just being able to be like, hey, I'm having this experience. I'm choosing to have it. And I want to be there fully, was huge for me. It was huge for me in that space. And anything in particular, I feel like I've come back with, I don't know if I would even say that I've received any specific downloads, but more of just an inherent knowing, right? If that makes sense.
It does. That makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah, it seems like information is more easily bypassing the analytical logical mind into knowing. So it's that makes a lot of sense to me. Let's talk about samskaras. What are they, and how can we rewrite these deeper patterns?
Great question and great segue from what we were talking about, because a samskara is a latent impression. And I maybe said a little more simply, it's an opinion that shapes your perception that maybe you don't even realize. It's so subconscious and ingrained at this point that you may not even be aware of it. And I think a perfect one would be, hey, these higher capabilities of our minds and our ability, what it means to be human, is a huge samskara for most people. I think whether you're talking about faith or astral projection or even being aware of your energy body, a lot of us have the block that, okay, well, that's just not in my capability.
Love that framing. Yeah. So it's like a block to truth.
Yes.
Or it's like a subconscious limitation on what and who it is that you really are. Is that how you see it?
Yes, absolutely. And the sutras talk about this in depth. We get into the klishas, which are our obstacles to yoga, or, blocks to stilling the mind. There's one that encapsulates the other four, and that's avidya, or ignorance. And such an interesting topic. If you say that out loud and people are like, oh, because you're immediately like targeting what they've decided they're not going to relook at, that they believe. And that's really what it's all about, is being, that self-study and being centered in, okay, I know that I don't know, and I'm willing to let go of these things. And the sutras will tell us, as we practice, we replace those with healthier, more aligned with truth samskaras. And that was kind of the muscle memory that I mentioned earlier. Um, it becomes easier and easier to associate with your consciousness as you replace those earthly and human impressions with those of your full capability.
Very cool. That's the rewiring, is
Yes.
translating those. Gotcha. And I was just thinking in maybe more modern terms, for those of you interested in this concept in particular, it's limiting beliefs. It's that's another term that I think we use in self-development that's similar in nature to samskaras. And the rewiring is starting to replace those limiting beliefs with empowering beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, even from belief to knowing. That's the big shift in this exploration. So a lot of the sutras message, from what I can deduce, is about clearing the way rather than like adding in things. It's like clearing the way to who it is that you really are. So and this is maybe an abstract question, but what do you think as a whole the sutras are asking us to clear? Samskaras is one of those things, I'm sure.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we're clearing everything that's not that unchanging essence of who we are. We're clearing the thoughts. We're clearing what we think we need. Uh, that's a
I
big
love
one.
that. What we think we need.
Right. And it's simply, you could say, I think everyone can kind of relate to, okay, well, if I had less, it would be easier to still my mind. If you think about that, you have less to maintain, you have less to pay for, all of those things. But it's this contentment that comes with truly realizing like what you actually need, which is, in my opinion, the more I get centered in the work, it's my body. Our bodies are the only possession we have that we don't have to acquire. And the same thing with the breath. Your breath is always there. You don't have to go get it or find it. You always have the breath. And that's really my biggest takeaway from this whole practice is I don't really need a lot. And the more I tell myself I need outside of me, I'm really limiting my own capability. And that doesn't mean that we don't love and share, but it means that you're centered in a place that's behind your emotional fluctuations as well as the fluctuations of the mind.
The awareness that is aware.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful. And so as you journey on this path, it's a powerful, powerful path. You start to open up into perception itself changing. And that brings me to, and I've been excited to talk about this since the very beginning of our conversation around this, the Siddhis, the yogic superpowers, if you will. What's your understanding of the Siddhis, and how should we orient towards them or not?
So the Siddhis are mystic powers. That's actually the translation would be mystic powers, which I like in its own there. Um, and like I said, it's so interesting. It's how I know that I've practiced this before in other lifetimes, because those were the first things that came back. Right. The great out of body experience, which that's astral projection to me, is listed just like that in the Siddhis, the great out of body experience. Also being able to levitate, interact with places that are far from you in location, telepathy. Really, the list goes on and on. And when I talk about this, I just read almost the whole chapter of sutras because one, there's just not much to explain. And I feel that way about the translation that is this book in its own. It's written in very clear language, especially the translation that I selected. It's the same reason I like to read the English Standard Version of the Bible. It's not trying to make it poetic or, for lack of a better term, flowery in any way. It's just a word for word translation of what's there. And I think it lands for everyone as they read it. But what's interesting about the Siddhis, and I have two main things I want to talk about here. One is that this brings up the concept of Samyama. That's how, as you go through the sutras, as we talk about each Siddhi, it starts by Samyama on blank, you receive this. And Samyama is essentially a successful and dedicated meditation practice of this one pointedness, right? So you have the one pointed dharana, focus. Then you get into the dhyana, which is your meditation, your, successful concentration on the object. And then you get into samadhi, which is that full absorption with the object that we talked about, the, real success of the entire meditation practice. And those three together make up Samyama. So I definitely take this practice and, chapter 3 as a whole, and I caution you to try to do any part of yoga for a Siddhi, because that misses the whole point. A, I don't think you can really reach one if that's your goal. And B, they're not the goal. Kaivalya, liberation, is the goal. And the sutras really reiterate that over and over again. And also when we talk about like cultivating sattva, they reiterate that like you have to let it go to, truly be situated in your consciousness, whether it's here or elsewhere in another lifetime. But I'll read just a couple here that I think you might find interesting. But by Samyama on karma, knowledge of one's death arises. So we're talking about, the concept of what we give is what we get, really consequences to our actions. I think it's a very simple and grounded way to explain karma. And by focusing, by having successful meditation on that, the knowledge of your own death can arise.
Which is really being able to anticipate and move outside of space and time in order to have that knowledge or that perception. It makes me think about in Autobiography of a Yogi, Paramahansa Yogananda had knowledge of his death. And he had told a student, a disciple, that day that he was going to give a talk and that he would pass. And of course they're freaking out, right? They're like, wait, what? Like, what do you mean? And he, true to form, went out there, gave this talk, and then dropped dead. And that to me was so fascinating. And you hear about these yogis in India and ancient times that had all kinds of these powers, breatharians that could live off of prana or life force or just water, levitation, astral projection. What's the term for when you can see other places? Remote viewing. That's another term for it. Remote viewing. And another thing I find interesting about this is that it's not just in the within the culture of yoga that this emerges, right? It emerges in all kinds of indigenous cultures. In Egypt, we were looking at hieroglyphs of literally this process of something becoming levitated, no longer needing to be carried. And so you see these, that's why we talk about telepathy still. That's why it's in our popular culture, is because there's some kernel of truth to this capacity that human beings have. And to your point, and the Yoga Sutras really try and like drive this home, it's not the goal.
Mm-hmm.
Like it is fascinating, and I definitely am very fascinated by it. But if you make your practice about achieving levitation or about achieving astral projection, even, it's interesting to me that your astral projection capability came online when I think you said you stopped trying.
Mm-hmm.
And it
100%.
started to reveal itself to you. But you were still doing the work of consciousness, which is the work of yoga.
It came after that period too, where I devoted myself to truth, right? Like I started getting down the rabbit hole of alternate information, and I actually watched the documentary Zeitgeist and had a full-blown spiritual crisis. And I literally dropped to my knees and prayed, and became an agnostic that day. I left my Baptist Christian faith. I literally said that I am confused and I do not know what is true, but I want to serve truth and I want to understand the true nature of God. And that moment changed my entire life. Like it's why I'm here where I'm at. It's why I found yoga. It's why I am successful in astral projection, because it was no longer about me. It was about service to the divine and to our divine creator. And that's really my biggest message, and what shapes the way in which I teach yoga to others is it's not about us. At the end of the day, it's
I
not.
love that so much. I got chills on that. It's such, if you take anything from this conversation, take what Kaitlyn just said there, listen back to it, because that is what it's about. When
Mhm.
it is not about the self-serving nature of experience, that takes so much courage what you did there, because there's a huge degree of humility, a huge degree of courage. And you mentioned this before, but having the audacity to admit that you don't know, the paradox there is that so much can then flow to you, because it's like the resistance, all of this like crunchiness that we believe about ourselves, just kind of gets out of the way. And so much more can be received. And so I really truly commend you for that, because it's challenging to get there, but it's what this is all about. And ultimately your relationship to truth, like you're saying, like for me, it's how much of my wholeness can I bring into this dimension of space and time? And I
Yes,
don't
be
view that.
situated in your wholeness.
Yeah, be situated, grounded in your wholeness, which is, it's not the earthly self. It's not the ego. It's not, we have those tools for certain things in this incarnation, which is great. But so much of this, and that's what the sutras are really pointing us towards, is to clear that away so you can start to orient towards your wholeness. And so that's just so beautiful, and truly what this is all about.
Yeah, one last thing on that topic. Well, first, I'll say that I'm no longer an agnostic.
I figured.
This work, and like I said, the whole concept of what we're talking about, of being open to truth and open to change, and especially if you do that in a spiritual light, I deeply believe, because it happened for me, and I don't see myself as special. I don't. I'm not. None of us are. We're here in a material meat suit. I'm humbled by what I've experienced, and that's the entirety of it. But if you ask God to show himself and you are willing to be molded by God, he will appear. 1,000,000%. I have no doubt that will happen for any individual. And you talk about samskaras and getting out of your own way, which is really the whole thing. I think that's another great definition for yoga. It's the practice of getting out of your own way. And I just used to, you talk about mantras, I used to sit on my mat and just in my head, I would go, I don't know shit. I don't know shit. Just over and over again. That would be my whole meditation practice. And not in some sort of negative beating myself up way, but that was me rewriting that code of like, okay, I'm willing to let go of whatever it is that is confining my ability to see.
Mm. Ooh, yeah. You know what comes through to me on that is that the sutras are a structure, right? They point the way. They are a guiding light. And there's lots of guiding lights in this experience. But ultimately, you have, because of your inherent wholeness, we all have access to that information at any point in time, right? It's inherent to who it is that we are. And so I think sometimes people, and this has been myself at times as well, we get a little hyper focused on the structure, on the guidance, on the rules, on the do this, don't do that. And the beautiful thing about what you just pointed to is that allows you to kind of wipe the slate clean and simply experience the experience, which will reveal to you your wholeness, and it'll reveal to you the way. And that's such a powerful inner authority to start to connect with, because each person's awakening, and I truly believe this, I believe that there's really two ways to look at it. Either we're all not that special, which is true, or we're all really special. And so the act of getting into your wholeness, you can kind of release some of the rigidness that we have that's there for a very beautiful reason. But I like what you pointed to there is as far as I don't know anything. But that opens up so much possibility, right? Because then if you don't know anything, what could you know? It feels very opening. It feels very welcoming, very powerful.
Absolutely. And I love what you just said there, because humanity is special. Like, we have forgotten that we are spiritual beings. Like, we look at ourselves as lesser than and so disassociated from spirit, but we all have this higher capability. And I started to say this earlier, or wanted to, was something you were saying. We're all capable of telepathy. That is a deep underlying samskara that's not in our capabilities, each and every one of us. And even if you're very in tune with your intuition, that's definitely part of it. And I've noticed it's one of those things, like I've definitely experienced that. But I don't have much control over it. But I have noticed, like, these thoughts will enter my mind and I'll literally think, oh, well, I bet they're thinking this. And every time I lean into that or repeat it to people, they're mind blown. And that's something that changes too when you start to lean into those things, as they become more clear. But when you're first opening yourself to those capabilities, you're going to hear it in your own voice.
Yes, we all have these abilities.
Oh, and I wanted to say one other thing too that you pointed out, that's deeply tied into the sutras, is this practice of stillness, of stilling, so the divine can lead, is really the whole book of the sutras. It's all of yoga, and it's presented very early. Yoga is the stilling of the mind, so the seer can abide in its own true nature. Otherwise, at other times, the seer is absorbed in the changing states of the mind. Right? So we've got it right there, that it's the stilling. And then we're told that, oh, well, how do we still our minds? We still it through practice and dispassion, devotion to trying, and detachment from the results of that. Also, detachment to what you gain, right? We're talking about the Siddhis, we're talking about all of these things. And then they go through all of that. We go through a lot of the other information of, the categories of thoughts that we have and all of these things and how to establish your practice. And then there's just a big or that says, or you can be devoted to the Lord. You can try all of these things. You can do all of this physically from your humanity, or you can ask God to show you the way. And the idea is that either one of those are going to lead you to the same place. And I think at some point, even if you're situated in your humanity with trying to do this work, at some point, you're going to realize that there's something higher than you. And it's not necessarily required. And this was one of those things that really bothers me about a lot of interpretations of Western practices. We take all of this out of it entirely. I don't know if it's because, instructors themselves aren't comfortable with it, or they don't think that students are going to be comfortable with it. I'm not sure, but it's such a disservice to what it actually is. I think that's the reason for the disassociation from the physical and the spiritual practice.
That's a really good question. Yeah, you got me going on that one. I know when Paramahansa Yogananda was coming over to the States in the 1920s, his teacher, Sri Yukteswar, had told him something to the effect of India needs more technology. It needs more of this like external analytical mind. And the West needs more of the spiritualization.
Mm-hmm.
And they both can come into balance in this way. And that was his task. That's why he left India on this lifelong mission of his to bring yoga to the States, to the West. So it's interesting, right? With that framing, they knew when they were doing this that the West was deprived of this spirituality, this side of who it is that we really are, that we've just fallen asleep to. And so that's an interesting question. I don't know if I have a really great answer for it, but it's, I think, something to sit with, is why do we feel so uncomfortable with that aspect? It's very clearly, to your point, an aspect of yoga. It's in all of the text. It's not something that we're divining now, even though I'm also not opposed to new perspectives emerging as we grow and learn. But I do think it has something to do with the, I think one thing is religion, where in the past especially, maybe less now, religion really held the authority on spirituality and being the mechanism of connecting to your wholeness. So that was very prominent. And that's also why they wrote so much about the intersection between God and yoga. And I think it's also the Industrial Revolution, the scientific revolution, and this like glorification of the analytical mind in the West. And that being the reason for our ascension and power and perceived power. And now we're starting to realize, like literally right now, I think, that ascension is quite fallible and it's incomplete because we're still not accepting or welcoming or even just waking up to who it is that we really are, that yoga's been pointing us to. That's my soapbox. That's what came up for me. I wonder what else came up for you with that.
Well, I think I should give you the sutra definition for ego, which is egoism. It's also one of our cliches or obstacles to yoga. It actually comes, I believe it's second to avidya, because it's essentially avidya being situated in your being. That's egoism. But it's defined as when you take the power of seeing and the instrument of seeing to be the same thing. Right? So that's a very heavy thing, but the more I sit with that description, it's confusing yourself for God. That's really what I take away from it. And when we strip the spirituality out of yoga, people come and, like we started this, they get all these benefits and they think it's them. And that's the ego. It's not about getting into, headstand or king pigeon. That doesn't bring you to enlightenment. Surrender brings you to enlightenment. And yeah, I was going to say something. Lost my train of thought in that beauty right there.
Oh, that's beautiful. Surrender brings you to enlightenment.
God is given as optional for the casual yoga practitioner. But when we get into all of the paths of yoga, whether it's Raja, Ashtanga, I'm not as familiar with Kriya, but I'm sure with Kriya, because it's for all of it, surrender to God is a niyama. If you follow the niyamas or the, personal observations of the wisdom, then you have to surrender to something larger than you. It's no longer optional.
Beautiful. Kaitlyn, thank you so much. This has been such a fun, mind-provoking conversation. And we always close with a few rapid-fire questions for all our guests. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. The first question is, what is a belief that you've held that you no longer hold?
Wow, there's so many. Um, uh, well, the first one coming to mind is that life is meaningless, because it's not. There's things. There's a reason that samsara is here. There is a beautiful function of living this life, and I didn't always see it that way.
Beautiful. And what is consciousness to you?
It's the unchanging.
And this might be similar, but what is source, God, or oneness to you?
Oh, that just really the first word that comes to mind is the whole meaning. It's really the whole point. The illusion that we're less than that is just that. It's an illusion. There is no separateness. If you want it, it's there.
Hmm. And if it were 100 years in the future on Earth, what do you hope for humanity?
Oh, the revitalization of spirituality, for sure. I think that's really the biggest thing we need, is to look at each other and be like, hey, regardless of religion, we're all seeking our creator. And if we can do that united as a species, I don't think there's really anything that can stand in our way at that point.
Mm. Thank you. Thank you. And if people want to connect with you deeper, how can they find you?
So Facebook is a great way to do that. Also, local to my area, I've got a lot of events going on in person, multiple studios. I'm going to be involved at the Regeneration Station doing my new practice that really I've launched this week called Soul Somatics. So yeah, Facebook is the best way to get a hold of me.
And where are you locally?
In Pensacola, Florida.
Okay, beautiful. So you can check out Kaitlyn there. It sounds like a very, very cool new offering that you're providing, much needed during this time. Thank you, Kaitlyn, for journeying with me. Deeply appreciate you, your wisdom, and your heart. And until next time, light beings.
Likewise. Thank you, Crystal.
Thank you. Thank you for journeying with us today, Light Being. We hope you enjoyed the episode. And before you go, we want to invite you to explore the SoulPod app, where you can immerse yourself in daily lessons, guided meditations, and breath work to develop a soul-nourishing daily ritual and tune back into your own inner guidance system. You can download SoulPod in the App Store or directly from the show notes to start your free trial today and awaken the ancient wisdom within you.